Coming up, we talk with Pulitzer and Peabody award-winning podcast host Connie Walker, named one of Time 100's most influential people of 2024, and an exclusive look into the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. Those interviews, plus headlines on the ICT Newscast.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.
Support for the ICT Newscast with Aaliyah Chavez comes from the Arizona PBS studios in Phoenix at the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communications at Arizona State University.
Amidawa Hopa. Thank you for joining us. I am Aaliyah Chavez. We start today in Illinois with a bit of history in the making. For the first time, a federally recognized tribe has sovereign territory in the state. Last week, the Interior Department took 130 acres into trust for the Prairie Band Potawatomi Nation of Kansas. 175 years ago, the federal government illegally sold off nearly 1,300 acres of Potawatomi land when Chief Chabonet traveled to Kansas. The move caps a long effort to right what the Prairie Band chairman calls a historical wrong.
I'm thankful that I'm able to sit here today and at least have this one little piece of correcting a historical wrong, a win for Indian country.
In Hawaii, 2 reports released last week fill in some of the gaps about what went wrong during the Maui fire that killed over 100 people last August. One report outlines communication challenges like power and phone outages, along with language barriers during rescues. It states the morning fire was extinguished but re-erupted 40 minutes later and resources were already stretched thin. The second report details more in-depth challenges and improvements. A third report, which is expected in a couple of months, is set to dive into the origin of the fire. In Alaska, the Biden administration has rejected a 211-mile industrial road project that would run through the Brooks Mountain Range. Last week, the Bureau of Land Management said the Ambler Road project poses unacceptable risks to wildlife habitat, water quality, and the native communities that depend on natural resources in the region. By selecting the no action option as its policy choice for the project, the Bureau will not issue a permit, allowing the road to be cross-land managed by the agency. It also implemented new rules that strengthen the environmental protections in the 23 million acre National Petroleum Reserve. Staying in Alaska, a new database will provide insight for the patterns of salmon and the ocean. Researchers from the University of Alaska Fairbanks compiled international salmon studies of the North Pacific dating back to the 1950s. The project was funded by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's Office of Law Enforcement, which hopes to use the information about where salmon are concentrated to help curb illegal fishing. The centralized database will be made publicly available and includes information on an estimated 14 million salmon. We move now to New York City, where the United Nations has opened its Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. The 23rd annual event runs for 2 weeks. APTN's Angel Moore was there and brings us this report.
I'm here in New York City. Behind me is the United Nations headquarters, where hundreds of Indigenous peoples from around the world have gathered in hopes that their concerns can be heard, including Ben Ausau Samuel from Sudan.
Because over the years we have seen Indigenous peoples lacking education, lacking cultural values, lacking certain kind of respect and recognition from our government and our society. And we have all come to agreement that it's high time we understand the importance of Indigenous people.
The forum was established as an advisory body for Indigenous peoples at the United Nations. This year, the focus includes financing Indigenous peoples to protect the planet and address climate change, including protecting Indigenous rights. This led Nicholas Paul to travel all the way down from Sestansik, Wolastoqey Nation, New Brunswick. Paul says Canada is ignoring treaty rights, especially right now when First Nations fishers are being arrested for harvesting.
The United Nations has their permanent forum on Indigenous issues right now, and one of the topics here is the criminalization of Indigenous rights. So it's perfect timing. We want to bring attention to it, and we shouldn't have to go to court to make the government obey its own courts.
The forum also ensures the United Nations Declaration of Indigenous Rights are implemented worldwide. Issues discussed in side events are scheduled for the rest of the week. Angel Moore, APTN National News, New York City.
The Pulitzer and Peabody Award-winning podcast host Connie Walker was recently named one of Time 100's most influential people of 2024. She discusses her journey on her podcast Stolen with ICT's Paris Wise.
So you were named one of Time's 100 most influential people of 2024. Congratulations, and tell me, what does this mean to you?
I honestly, it feels kind of wild and surreal to to be honest. They told me about it a little while ago, but it really wasn't until I saw the website yesterday that it actually felt real.
Well, this isn't the first award you have received for your storytelling. You have a Pulitzer Prize winning podcast called Stolen. Tell our viewers a little bit about it and how it has evolved.
Well, Stolen is a podcast that I've been working on with Spotify and Gimlet Media. And each season is kind of its own story, its own investigation into a mystery in an Indigenous community. And so the first season focused on the disappearance of a woman named Jermaine Charlo from Missoula, Montana. And over 8 episodes, it's a deep dive into our investigation into her disappearance, but also, really trying to help people understand the crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous people and the crisis of violence in our communities. The second season, which is the season that we won the Pulitzer and the Peabody for, was actually a personal story for me. It was an investigation into my father's experience at an Indian residential school in Canada. Surviving St. Michael's was, again, like another 8-episode investigation, deep dive, and into a single residential school in Canada, but also, our attempt to try to find one of the Catholic priests who abused my father at the school. And through that investigation, we also, really try to understand the ongoing effects of the residential school and boarding school system and how they're continuing to impact our families and communities. And this third season that is just out is called Stolen, Trouble in Sweetwater. And we investigate the disappearances of 2 women on the Navajo Nation, and also investigate the crisis of policing in the community and look at the impacts, I guess, of some of the issues of criminal justice on the Navajo Nation. And that's going to be our last season of Stolen with Spotify. Our show was canceled. So we're looking for a new home for Stolen, but we're hopeful that we'll be able to continue this work in some way.
These are incredibly, obviously, sensitive topics, as you mentioned, and something that you also mentioned was something that a lot of our communities still deal with today. And they're stories that are familiar to Indigenous communities, but are very new to other people. Why is it so important, though, to share these stories, even though they're so difficult to tell and can bring up those really hard truths?
Our stories are also the stories of these 2 countries that we live in. This is everyone's history that they don't understand. This is everyone's story that they've only been told part of. The truth of Canada and the truth of the United States and our history. And this is something I think that affects us all. And the sooner that people can realize that, the better off we'll all be. When I first started reporting on the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls in Canada, I remember feeling so hesitant and so concerned about bringing up painful memories and traumatic memories for family members, because they were already dealing with the loss of a loved one, whether it was because of a death or disappearance. But we know in our communities that there's ongoing trauma that is often experienced throughout our lives. And I remember as someone who experienced trauma myself, as a child and after that, it was something I was very sensitive to. I felt like it was so important to tell these stories, but also I wanted to do it in the most sensitive, like, to be really sensitive to people's experiences, as sensitive as I could be. Um, and then once I kind of kept doing this work, I started seeing actually that when you're given space to share your story in a safe way, in a place where you feel respected and where you're given some power and agency over your own story, it can actually be healing to share even difficult stories and difficult truths. And really that's what surviving St. Michael's was for me. It was such a personal story about my own abuse, about my father's abuse, and about my family. But it really, because as the head of Stolen and the host of the show, I had so much agency and so much support from the incredible team I work with at Stolen to take on a story like that, and it was such a positive and powerful healing experience, that I think that's been a lesson that I've learned through this, that these are painful truths, but they're so important to know and understand. And I think there's finally some recognition of how important our stories are, but I think that there's almost like an impulse to push past it and to talk about reconciliation and how to move forward. And I think that we really need to know and understand the full truth, before talking about reconciliation. And I think that's so much of what journalism can do, and that's our role is helping to expose the truth, and that's something that I feel like passionate about as well.
So, for those who have yet to listen to your podcast, where can they find it?
Anywhere you listen to podcasts, on Spotify or on Apple, really anywhere. And the final season, Stolen, Trouble in Sweetwater, is all out now. So you can binge listen, and all of our previous seasons are also available. And if you still, that's not enough, you can listen to the previous podcast I did with CBC called Missing and Murdered. And hopefully have more news soon about what's coming next for us.
Connie Walker, we can't wait to see what you do next. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Paris.
The U.S. Forest Service is partnering with Indigenous tourism organizations to advance cultural tourism with Native nations across the country. ICT's Shirley Snav has the story of a Northern California tribe looking to advance clean energy.
The Pitt River Tribe in Northern California will develop a master plan for tourism with this 2-year grant. Geraldine Spencer chairs the Kwan Board of Directors, which is the economic development arm of the tribe.
The biggest thing we want to focus on is basically like clean energy. In the area where we're located, where we're working on erecting a project at, it's kind of like the hub of 4 directions. They're coming up from Reno, Nevada. They're coming from up there in Oregon, from up in Alturas, and then of course, the southern people come up this way from Sacramento, San Francisco, to come up and visit the area. There's a lot of attractions going on. We have like the Bernie Falls, and we have caves, subway caves, and then we also have beautiful campgrounds in the area. Is what the tourists come in and spend the weekend during the holiday season. In the summer they come and stay. And so a lot of places, the tourists that come in, it's roughly probably maybe at least, I would say maybe 100 miles, both all 4 directions where the tourists come from. And so along the way, there's rubbish that is tossed out the window. And so our place plan on, probably erecting maybe, a gas station there, a hotel, you can get into the hospitality. and there'd be a place, where they could, throw their rubbish away and then, stay and probably journey on their way. So that's kind of like what the highlight is, is the clean energy. Tourism is huge right now, and I think that's the place to be, such as Bernie and such a beautiful area up here. With our stories, and monuments that we would be placed around the area, we would be able to share our stories. I kind of like have it envisioned of, out there where we're going to develop, the hotel and the truck stop gas station. We could have like a big old area out there and set up these monuments talking about, our tribe and a lot of places where, the tourists can go and visit. And, we want to be able to bring our native people jewelry in and a lot of their arts, and then the community as well, and share our stories, our culture with them. And like when these tourists come in and hear of the Pit River tribe and buy some of our jewelry, and because anytime I want to go to different tribal places, tribal area, I always want to, bring back, a lot of their jewelry. It's like the jewelry I'm wearing now. I think this came from way over in Arkansas or someplace, and people look at the earrings and it's like, oh, those are beautiful. Where'd you get that at? And I share, with, the stories that I got from that tribe, and it's like they say, wow, you know what? I'm going to go over there one of these days. I'm going to go check it out. And so, with our stories being told with the artwork and the tribal stories, these stories, will travel and will bring tourists back, into our area. And our stories, not only disappear, but, they will carry on with, the conversation.
Shirley, Snav, ICT News.
At FEMA, a huge part of our mission is to make sure we are preparing the nation for catastrophic events. As extreme weather continues to become more intense and frequent, disaster preparedness has never been more important. Older adults face even greater risks and challenges when it comes to preparing, especially those who live independently, have low income, have disabilities, or live in rural areas. This May, President Biden announced Older Americans Month, reminding us that older Americans are the pillars of our community, and we owe it to them to value their wisdom, celebrate their contributions, and champion their well-being. This September, I'm excited to announce that National Preparedness Month will have a special focus on the older adult population. Through our Ready campaign, FEMA is evolving the way we engage with communities to be more inclusive and impactful than ever before. Today, I ask you to join us in our efforts by finding ways to help prepare the older adults in your network or community. Stay tuned for new tools and resources, but don't wait. Visit ready.gov to get started. Thank you.
Across Turtle Island, tribes are making language revitalization a top priority. After all, language is a lifeline to identity and heritage. From New York, John O's Bowen from the Sonica Nation shares her inspiring efforts to restore the Seneca language with reporter Stuart Huntington.
So my name is John Oates. I am a member of the Sonica Nation and Beaver Clan. I live on the Allegheny territory of the Sonica Nation, and I really like it when I'm able to use our language.
Why is it important to bring back your beautiful language?
One of my elders constantly pulls out the dictionary, believe it or not, the English dictionary, and looks up nation. And he says, what does it say in the definition? What do we have to have? And it says a shared language. So in my mind, thanks to my elder, if we truly want to be sovereign, we need to have our own language. We can't lose that. That is really part of who we are And it's a strong statement if we can still use our language that yes, we are a sovereign people. We have our own language. We have our own way of thinking. So as a spiritual person from the Cold Spring Longhouse, I also believe it just has a different depth, our language. When we do our ceremonies, it just, the things, the words that we have in our language, the concepts are just so different sometimes than those of English, that I really feel like even our ceremonies would really lose out in terms of this really deep, powerful meaning if we had to do them in English. So our people actually do say, like, if we have to do them in English, then we need to stop our own ceremonies because they need to be done in our own languages. And they're very strict about that. So even to this day, all of our ceremonies are only done in our language. People might talk between portions of it to their neighbor in English, but the ceremony itself will be carried out in Seneca. It's a very deep, I guess, a spiritual thing to really understand and know your language, as well as expressing sovereignty for yourself and your people. And the neat thing about working at the Sonica Nation is they have sincerely put forth funds to create various language efforts within their government. So we have an immersion department. We have my department, the Allegheny Language Department. We have a Faith Keeper School, which is a Montessori Seneca language nest. We have language programming within our early childhood centers. We have a ceremonial program. We have a Cattaraugus Territory Language Department. And we have an immersion language nest on the Cattaraugus Territory as well. So there are many, many things here on the Sonica Nation territory that are working toward revitalization or restoration efforts. Some of our elders prefer restoration, so I will try to use that.
Bowen talked about her mother's reaction to hearing more Seneca language users.
When she came and she saw all these people, and she saw young people who could do certain things, she cried because she never thought she would see that. So there are definitely good things happening. It's encouraging. I try not to think about how much work we have left because it can be overwhelming. When you see those people just feel empowered and happy to be able to manipulate the language or just use it with ease, it's just an amazing thing to see. Even if you aren't the teacher, even if you're just the administrative supporter, it's still a joy to see.
Chi eskalingwat. Chi eskalingwat. I'm happy-minded. I'm happy-minded. Chi eskalingwat. Chi eskalingwat. I'm happy-minded. I'm happy-minded.
Across the country, tribes are gaining more say in land use decisions under so-called co-management pacts. The idea is spreading among federal and state agencies. Now, a central database of these pacts makes it easier for tribes to find best practices.
Federal and state agencies are teaming up with tribes on many fronts, including wildfire and habitat management and support for sustainable hunting and gathering, says Starlin Miller from the Wilderness Society.
I think the Biden administration made co-management, co-stewardship a core component of strengthening the nation-to-nation relationship with tribal nations, including efforts to increase tribal co-stewardship of land and water, incorporating Indigenous knowledge into department work where appropriate, and preserving and protecting sacred sites around the country, which has opened the door for greater collaboration.
And the practice is booming, says the USDA's Heather Dawn Thompson.
The Forest Service has completely changed the way they do business, and in 3 short years, we now have 180 co-stewardship agreements with tribal nations.
The criticism? The pacts have not consistently created equal partnerships. So the Native American Rights Fund, the Wilderness Society, and the universities of Washington and Montana have teamed up to pool co-management information into one database so tribes can better navigate the details, says NARF staff attorney Ada Montague Steepleton.
Where do we find the statutes? Where do we find the authorizing regulations? Where do we find the directives from the executive agencies, and then all the departmental guidance? There's a need to create a space for resources, learning, conversation, a community of practitioners. on the potential of co-stewardship and co-management tools. There's real opportunity and excitement within Indian country, I think.
At a vital intersection.
The way that we relate to land in this country is a problem. We need to fix it, and co-management and co-stewardship relationships are one way in that direction.
80% of the world's biodiversity are being managed by Indigenous peoples. I think the conservation community sees that Indigenous people and their knowledge are going to help with the climate change issues we're facing today. I think that there's a lot of opportunity on public lands for tribes to rekindle and reconnect with ancestral homelands. So there's a lot of possibility for systems of change right now. And I think that Indigenous voice and leadership has to be at the forefront. They have to be at the table. Nations need to lead the way.
Stuart Huntington, ICT News.
That is a slice of our Indigenous world. For all the latest, visit us at ictnews.org. From all of us in the newsroom, stay safe, my relatives.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.